Okay, so here we go. We're talking about tax reform. I'm going to do this all in one take. There we go. Now it's loaded. What to do about taxes? I'm not talking about the GOP tax reform that just passed, I believe, last night. I know I'm a little late to the party. I'm a little late to the conversation. It's going to seem like moot point now that we've passed the tax reform. But what I'm talking about is something more comprehensive. It's a concept that I've been mulling over for 2 years. My goals here with this concept is to start a movement and to spread that movement to every town, county, and state in America. The origin of my idea, it comes from something called the FairTax. I'm going to provide links in the description to describe the FairTax and what it's about. Basically, it does away with all taxes except for one simple, flat consumption tax. And I'm a pretty big proponent of the FairTax, but in one of the GOP debates, there was an exchange between Marco Rubio and Mike Huckabee. Huckabee, of course, is a proponent of the FairTax, and Rubio is not. And Rubio said to Huckabee, "What's to keep Congress from just raising the tax rate?" And I thought, that's a good question. And I thought of a solution, and that solution developed into a very complex idea. And it's just interesting. I've learned a lot about taxes. I'm still learning a lot about taxes. And, well, we'll get into it. Okay, so here's the problem. First, we have to present the problem before we can present the solution. There's communism and there's anarchism. So you have communism on the left and anarchy on the right. A lot of people think that fascism is the far right, but fascism, on this spectrum anyway, is on the left. It's about more government control on this side and less government control on this side. Anarchy would be no government. And we want to be in the center. We want to be in rule of law. So the far left, they believe that the government owns the means and method of production. And on the far right, there's this slogan, taxation is theft. Now, I'm concerned because this slogan has become popular for those even closer to the center. Conservatives and libertarians have taken on this slogan, taxation is theft. I find that to be concerning. I have a few issues with that slogan, but I'll get into it. And then a little closer to the center, I know we don't think of Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz as center left or center right, but Bernie Sanders likes to say, tax the rich. And Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Rand Paul and all people like them, they like to just say, let's just tax people less. And the rest of us are in the middle, and we don't know what to do. The other problem is I can't escape the idea that we can do better. We can do better than a lot of the we can do better than our current tax system. We can do better than the new plan that was passed, and we can do better than a lot of the proposals that are out there that I've heard. I've heard a few different tax proposals, fair tax, flat tax, and just a few others. And in my mind, almost any change is a step in the right direction. The way I would rank it, I would put our current tax plan at the very bottom, and then the new GOP plan would be just above that, and then a flat tax would be just above that, and then a fair tax would be above the flat tax, just doing that with income tax and everything else for a consumption tax. And then, in my own humble opinion, my idea would be the pinnacle. So what are some benefits of the new GOP plan? This is just to my understanding. The corporate tax rate is lowered, I believe, from 35 to 21%. I don't think that that's changed. It lowers income tax rates for everyone. And which these two are things that, Republicans generally agree on. Hopefully we can all agree on those things. Those are good things. But we expand deductions for medical expenses, and we repeal the Obamacare tax. So hopefully those last two, even people on the left will agree is a good thing. So the drawbacks of the new GOP, the drawbacks of the new GOP plan, if you're a liberal, then the whole thing is a drawback. So, I'm sorry. Would be, well, I don't like to seem like a purist, but I am. So we're going to go with it. Tax brackets and tax deductions. I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. I'm going to benefit from tax deductions this year. And, but let me see, my problem with these is it gives bureaucrats power to make arbitrary distinctions. We don't want arbitrary distinctions. So it gives some elected official power to decide what things should be deducted and where should the tax brackets be broken up. The tax brackets don't make any sense to me, because if you just make $1 more, then you're bumped into another tax bracket and you're taxed at a higher percentage. So you take one step forward to take 10 steps back. And that's looking at it optimistically. So in my mind, a more fair tax plan would be, simpler, flatter, and ideally we wouldn't need the deductions, but that's I'm sorry, that's just another topic for another time. Okay, so benefits of the flat income tax. So there was a flat income tax that was proposed by a number of candidates in the 2016 races. Let's see. So Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz. They all proposed some sort of flat tax. I don't think they were purely flat taxes, though. I think that some of them had deductions, but they at least had one tax bracket. The benefit of this is that it would simplify the tax code. Proponents say that it would take filing your income taxes would take 5 minutes, and you could do it on a postcard. I think that sounds pretty good. The benefit is that everyone pays equally, and there's no tax breaks for the rich. So the drawbacks of a flat tax would be that everyone pays equally, and there's no tax breaks for the poor. So the sword cuts both ways. The other problem is just realistically, deductions would start to creep back in. Milton Friedman has a great talk about this. It's a little long. It's actually probably as long as this video is going to be. But it's really great. I'll try and find it and link to it below. You can just search Milton Friedman, why tax reform is impossible. And that was another video that was really instrumental in getting this idea going. So deductions would start to creep back in, as Milton Friedman says, unless we change the tax laws by amendment, so that they can no longer have deductions and they can no longer have tax brackets. And we just do one simple flat tax for everyone. So even if we were to do that, and I understand that doing away with deductions and doing away with tax brackets, it's just, For some, that's just a problem in and of itself. But even if we were able to do away with that, then the question still remains, what is the correct tax rate? There are a lot of proponents that will say that it should be a flat 10% tax. They'll say if 10% is good enough for God, it's good enough for the government. But my question is, why not less? So let's see. Fair tax. I've already talked about the fair tax. I'm a big proponent. The great thing is that the government doesn't need to know your income with the fair tax. You're not filing an income tax, and your income is private. That should be private information. That's how it was through most of American history, up until, well, it's a little complex. We had a income tax during the Civil War, and then it was repealed, and then it was started again in the 1900s, like about 100 years ago. So for most of American history, we have not had an income tax, and the government doesn't need to know your income. The other benefit is that everyone pays equally, or everyone pays equally in proportion to how much they spend. So I'll just focus on that for a second. In proportion to how much they spend, so the rich will pay more because the rich spend more, either directly or indirectly. So the rich pay more, so we don't need to worry about the rich getting away. Okay, so there's a deduction, and everyone gets an equal deduction. It's called the prebate. There's a link in the description that explains that. Basically, just putting it in simple terms, they give you the prebate, the deduction is a check to pay for the taxes on necessity items. So up to the poverty level. So if you spend more than that, if you're, getting, never mind, I won't explain it. The link is in the description, but it pays for your taxes on necessity items up to the poverty level. So if you spend more than that, then you're getting taxed. You're paying the tax. So the other thing is, not every individual needs to file, only businesses. Of course, that's not entirely correct, because individual households need to file for the prebate, but only business owners need to file taxes. They need to file their income and how much they make. So there are some drawbacks to the fair tax. One that's pointed out is the outrageously high tax rate, 30%. I'd like to point out, proponents will say it's not really a 30% tax rate. Like, prices aren't going to increase by 30%. Prices will only increase by 1% after taxes, because the before tax price will go down, and then the after tax price will go up by 30%, and it's about a net 1% raise. That's what proponents say. It seems to check out. It seems to have the ring of truth to it. So there are other problems with the fair tax, but then it comes back to the problems that you have with the flat tax. What is the correct tax rate? They say 30%. Why not less? So that's where my idea comes in. As a conservative, I believe in limited government. Not necessarily big government or small government, because both lead to problems. I'm not an anarchist on the far right, and I'm not a communist on the far left. And I believe that a properly limited government is a benefit to society. So a limited government, our government is prevented from harming you in certain ways. They can't infringe on your free speech. They can't infringe on your religious practice. And the purpose, if I can put the purpose of government in one sentence, it's to punish those who violate the rights of others. It's a real oversimplification of the purpose of government, but for our purposes here, they cannot take away, in carrying out their purpose, they cannot take away your life, liberty, or property without due process. That's the Fifth Amendment. But the problem is, I would say that our tax system violates that amendment. They're taking away our property without due process. So, like I said, a properly limited government is a benefit to society. And it costs something to run the government. As Milton Friedman says, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has a cost to it. So there's a cost to running the government, and we need to fund it. So how do we fund the institution of force? And the answer is we need a limited method to fund the government. This is something that it's not on anyone's radar. I don't hear anyone talking about it. The closest thing I hear to it is the fair tax. So if you're tracking with me and you're already, one step ahead, you're already asking the next question: what are the limits that we should place on the government's ability to tax us? This is a question of should. It's not a question of how things are. It's a question of how things should be. I don't have all the answers. This can be a collaborative effort, and you can submit your own ideas, but these are some of my own. So taxes should be limited in two ways. We limit the method or methods through which they can tax us, and we limit the rate at which they can tax us. So how do we limit the method? I'm a real big fan of the fair tax. It's one simple flat tax on all the goods and services of registered businesses at the final level of consumption. That's a part that's in the fair tax. You can watch the fair tax videos. That way, if you register your business, which people do to protect their personal assets, you pay taxes. State and local authorities can impose requirements on governments on businesses to register after a certain point, but federal governments cannot require businesses to register. That would be the limits that I would be proposing. So, a state or a local government can say, if your business makes more than a certain amount, you have to register. Or there's just a number of different things that the state and local governments can do. But the method I'm proposing would prohibit the federal government from requiring businesses to register. So what that'll do is that will create some states that are more business friendly and some states that are less business friendly. Let's see. Okay, so how do we limit the rate? So elected officials submit themselves to an audit and income tax. So in my proposed idea, the only people who have an income tax are elected officials. Once they run for office and win, they submit themselves to an audit and an income tax. So their income tax would be equal to or greater than the sales tax rate, which they're imposing, plus the percentage of the budget, which is deficit spending. So they're getting, the more that they tax us, the more that they get taxed. And the more that they spend over budget, the more that they get taxed, because public debt is just taxing us later. And there would also, in my idea, there's stuff about limiting government compensation for elected officials, but we won't go into it for this video. Doing this in one take. All right. So what this will do is it will get elected officials to lower the tax rate and lower wasteful spending. Constituents will still need to keep elected officials accountable to the quality of government programs. So we don't want them to skimp out on the quality of programs, but we need to be involved. We need to be involved as an electorate and keep our officials accountable. Let me see, other features. This has always been the case. You can always donate to the government. So what this system would do is it would just make elected officials seek to raise more funds voluntarily. It'll turn them into fundraisers, basically. You could pledge to the government like you pledge to a Patreon. Speaking of which, never mind, we'll get to that at the end. I just think that it's a more moral system. As I said, everyone's taxed equally and proportionally to how much they spend. The rich are taxed more because the rich spend more. It's just a fact. And the government has incentive to reduce taxes and wasteful spending. We can make this idea even better, and I just want to hear some of your ideas. How you can help. Let me see. You can spread the word. You can like Frank Talks on Facebook. We'll be talking more about this idea, and you can share your thoughts. You can join our Patreon if you're interested in supporting this idea and financially and helping us spread to other. Well, first get instituted as a nonprofit and then spread to other states. You can join our Patreon, and the link for that should be in the description. Thank you.